A locked door. On the other side of it, voices rising in distress. A woman in her 70s stood at that door, urging her own son to open it. Beside her, 2 lawyers worked at the handle, unable to get it to turn. Whatever was happening inside that room lasted only minutes. By the time anyone reached her, help had already come too late. This did not happen between strangers. Everyone present that morning knew exactly who everyone else was. 2 of them were husband and wife. This is the case of Claudia Schaefer, a 44-year-old mother of 3, and the man she was in the process of divorcing, Fernando Ferre. On the outside, theirs was a marriage that looked like success, a respected career, a shared business, a home inside one of the most guarded private communities on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. Behind that image was a different reality, one that had been building for years, a reality documented in formal complaints, recorded in phone calls, and witnessed firsthand by people who worked inside that house. What happened on the morning of August 21st, 2015, would leave a woman gone, a man taken into custody at the scene, and a country left to confront how a relationship that appeared so composed from the outside could conceal so much danger within it. This is what the official record shows. Claudia Schaefer was born in Argentina in the early 1970s. She studied business administration, a degree built on structure and numbers, and she carried that discipline into every job she held afterward. By her 40s, she had built a career most people would call a success on its own terms. She worked her way up at Bodega Salentín, a well-regarded Argentine winery, eventually becoming secretary to the company's board. It was a position that required precision, discretion, and the trust of people far senior to her. Colleagues who worked alongside her for years described someone who handled pressure without letting it show, and who treated everyone around her, regardless of rank, with the same level of respect. Outside the office, Claudia was raising 3 children. People close to the family said she rarely spoke about her marriage at work. Whatever tension existed at home, she kept it separate from the version of herself she brought into the boardroom. Fernando Ferre's path looked different from the start. He earned a degree in business administration from the Universidad Católica Argentina, then went on to complete an MBA at the Thunderbird School of Global Management in the United States. From there, his career moved quickly through some of the most recognizable names in retail and consumer goods, Carrefour, then Coca-Cola, where he worked in market development.
It was the beauty industry that would come to define his professional identity. He joined L'Oréal, eventually rising to marketing director for the company's luxury product lines. Then came Avon, where he oversaw exclusive fragrance operations across Latin America. By 2010, he had reached the highest point of his career, general manager of Coty for Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay, a role that placed him at international product launches and industry events most executives never get close to. That position came with visibility most corporate careers never offer. Ferre appeared in photographs alongside some of the most recognized faces in entertainment and fashion at the time, among them Kate Moss, Paris Hilton, and David Bowie. He spoke 3 languages and moved comfortably through rooms most people only saw from a distance. Former colleagues who worked with him during this period described a man who seemed to draw real satisfaction from that proximity to fame, not just from doing the job well, but from being seen doing it.
In 2006, Claudia and Fernando combined their two worlds into one venture. Together, they founded Global 5, a company built around distributing cosmetics and perfume. On paper, the partnership made sense. She brought corporate discipline and financial structure. He brought a decade of contacts across the beauty and fragrance industry. For years, people who knew them socially described the business and the marriage behind it as a real partnership between equals. Then, a few months before everything between them began to fall apart, Cody terminated Farah's position. He left the company with a substantial severance package. What he did not walk away with, according to several people who knew him at the time, was any clear sense of who he was without that title attached to his name. For a man whose adult identity had been built almost entirely around recognition, travel, and access, the loss of that role appeared to hit differently than a typical career setback. Friends and former colleagues described a noticeable shift in him in the months that followed. More anxious about money, more focused on appearances, even as the substance behind those appearances was disappearing, and increasingly unsettled in ways that those closest to him struggled to fully explain at the time. It was around this same period that Fernando Ferrer began psychiatric treatment, seeking help for symptoms of depression and recurring panic attacks. This is who Claudia Schiffer and Fernando Ferrer were before everything changed. A woman with a steady, well-regarded career and 3 children who depended on her. A man who had spent decades building an identity around success, status, and the world's attention, all 3 of which were now slipping away from him at the same time. Neither of them could have known how quickly the next chapter of their story was about to begin, or how far apart the version of their marriage the public saw was from the one playing out behind closed doors. By the time Fernando Ferrer lost his position at Coty, the marriage he shared with Claudia Schiffer had already been under strain for years. What the public would only learn much later is that this strain had been documented in writing and on tape well before anyone outside the family had reason to suspect anything was wrong. 2 people who worked inside the Ferrer household for an extended period later gave formal accounts of what daily life there actually looked like. Both described an environment that grew steadily more tense over time. Ferrer's temper, they said, was frequent and difficult to predict, and the strain it created was felt by more than one member of the household. In the spring of 2015, Claudia and Fernando began seeing a couples therapist named Anna Maria Rothman. Their sessions ran from March through July of that year. Rothman would later describe what she heard from each of them in those rooms. Claudia told her she no longer believed the marriage had a future. Ferrer, in the same sessions, said he wanted to find a way to repair things, even as the relationship around him was already coming apart. What made Rothman's account significant was not just what she heard, but when she heard it. Her final sessions with the couple took place only weeks before the case that would later put both their names in headlines, giving her a closer, more recent window into Ferrer's state of mind than almost anyone else who would later be asked to testify about it. Separately, Claudia took a step that would later carry enormous weight in how this case was understood. She filed a formal complaint with Argentina's Office of Domestic Violence, an institution operating under the Supreme Court. In that complaint, She described an incident in which Ferre had become physically aggressive toward her in front of their 3 children during an argument over her wish to end the marriage. That complaint led directly to 2 legal protections. First, an exclusion order, removing Ferre from the apartment the family shared in the Recoleta neighborhood of Buenos Aires. Then, a restraining order, limiting any contact he could have with Claudia going forward. The complaint described more than a single incident. Claudia and people close to her also described an ongoing pattern that had developed over time. Ferre monitoring her phone activity, appearing without warning at her place of work, and at one point reaching out directly to her supervisor in what looked like an attempt to influence how she was seen there professionally.
None of these actions, taken alone, would necessarily alarm someone looking in from outside the marriage. Taken together, they described a pattern in which Claudia's independence was being steadily narrowed, piece by piece. 15 days before the case that would make headlines across the country, Claudia and Fernando Ferre had a phone conversation neither of them knew would later be played in full for a jury. In that call, Claudia confronted him directly about an earlier physical incident between them, telling him plainly that it had left her afraid of what he was capable of. Ferre's response on that same recording did not address what she was telling him. Instead, he turned the conversation toward his own financial pressure and the medication he had been prescribed for his psychiatric treatment. That recording was not the only one. Claudia had quietly saved several others over time, conversations that, taken as a whole, painted a picture of a relationship that had moved well past ordinary conflict. None of this was hidden from the systems designed to respond to exactly this kind of danger. There was a formal complaint on record. There was a court-ordered exclusion already in place. There was a licensed professional who had heard both sides describe the same relationship independently in real time. And there was a recorded warning in Claudia's own words. Spoken 15 days before everything changed. Every one of these details would later surface again, far more publicly than Claudia could have imagined when she first reported what was happening inside her own home. At the time, though, they were simply pieces of a private record, known only to a small circle of professionals and the people closest to her. What remained unresolved as the days moved closer to the case that would define both of their names was a far more practical matter, one that would, before long, bring Claudia and Fernando Ferre back into the same room together. By August of 2015, the restraining order keeping Fernando Ferre away from Claudia Schäfer had expired just days earlier. The two of them were still in the middle of divorce proceedings, with lawyers on both sides working through how to divide what remained of their shared life. The apartment, the family business, and a second property the couple had rented for years. That second property was a house inside Martindale Country Club, a private, gated community in Pilar, on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. The family had used the house for years before the marriage began to fall apart, and Claudia still had personal belongings there. Clothing, documents, items she needed back and had not yet been able to collect. To resolve it, the lawyers representing both sides arranged what was meant to be a controlled solution. Claudia would travel to the house on a set date, accompanied by her own attorney. Faray would be there as well, with his lawyer present. His mother, in her 70s, would also attend. On paper, it looked like a supervised handover, built specifically around the idea that having multiple people present would keep the situation contained. There is a reason protocols around domestic violence cases generally caution against this kind of arrangement. Bringing two people at the center of a documented conflict back into the same physical space, even with witnesses nearby, does not address the concerns that led to the restraining order in the first place. A group of people in one room offers limited oversight if the two people at the center of that conflict are able to separate themselves, even for a short period, into another part of the house.
That detail was not treated with particular concern on the morning of August 21st, 2015. The visit had been framed, by everyone involved, as a practical errand rather than a situation requiring additional caution. Alternatives existed. A third party could have collected Claudia's belongings on her behalf, or the exchange could have taken place at a neutral location with no history attached to it. Neither option was pursued. Instead, the decision was made to handle it directly, inside the same house where the couple had once lived together, with the people closest to both of them standing nearby. Claudia arrived at the house late that morning with her attorney. Faray was already there, with his own lawyer beside him. His mother had arrived as well. The mood inside the house was tense, but outwardly composed. Everyone present understood there was history between Claudia and Fernando. Everyone also understood, or believed, that the purpose of the visit was simple, brief, and contained. The group went inside together. The two attorneys and Faray's mother settled into the kitchen, making coffee, doing what they could to keep the atmosphere calm, while Claudia took care of what she had come to do. Claudia made her way toward the dressing room, where most of her remaining clothing and personal items had been kept. Fernando Faray followed her in, and once they were both inside, he closed the door behind them and locked it. On the other side of that door, 3 people remained in the kitchen, going on with their conversation, with no indication that anything was wrong. What happened next is known only through physical evidence and the accounts of those locked outside that door. Faray had taken 2 knives from the kitchen earlier that morning, without Claudia's knowledge. Once the door was locked, the confrontation between them turned violent within moments, leaving Claudia with no opportunity to leave the room or summon help. From the kitchen, the 2 lawyers and Faray's mother heard the situation escalate sharply. His mother reached the door first, asking him to stop. The lawyers forced the handle loose, but the lock held. Unable to get in, they moved to a window at the back of the house, where they were able to confirm something serious was taking place inside. The entire incident, from the moment Claudia entered the dressing room to the moment it ended, lasted only a few minutes. An autopsy later confirmed that the attack had been sustained, rather than brief or momentary. Investigators focused closely on what came before it, Faray retrieving weapons in advance, isolating Claudia in an enclosed space, and locking the only door behind them, a sequence prosecutors would later treat as the heart of the case. That sequence, more than anything found inside the room itself, became the foundation of the argument that what happened was not a sudden loss of control, but a deliberate course of action. Police arrived shortly after 11:39 that morning and found Faray still inside, making no attempt to leave. He was taken into custody on the spot.
a routine handover of personal belongings. The trial opened in May 2017 at the courthouse in San Isidro before Judge Esteban Andrahin. Over 5 days, 54 witnesses took the stand. Prosecutors Carolina Caraballo Calatayud and Laura Zeiseskand argued that the sequence of actions before the incident, weapons retrieved in advance, an isolated space, a locked door, reflected deliberate intent rather than a loss of control. Defense attorney Adrian Tanca countered that Fernando Ferrey's psychiatric condition and medication had impaired his judgment that day. The jury, 6 men and 6 women, returned a unanimous verdict on June 6, 2017. Guilty on all charges, aggravated by the marital bond and by gender-based violence. Judge Andrahin imposed a life sentence and removed Ferrey's parental authority over his 3 children. Since his conviction, Ferrey has been transferred through several correctional facilities across Buenos Aires province, including units in San Martin, Dolores, La Plata, Azul, Olmos, General Alvear, and Bahia Blanca. He is currently held at Unit 41 in Campana. Under Argentine law, he cannot request conditional release until 2050. Claudia Schaefer's 3 children are being raised by her sister, Sandra. The case remains one of the most thoroughly documented cases of its kind in Argentina's legal history.